Hello there, friends. This is Spencer Michaud, and welcome to your weekly astrology forecast for the week of December 9th through the 15th. We have a number of things going on this week, including a full moon in Gemini, a planetary ingress of Mercury into its exile in Sagittarius, a number of Venus aspects where Venus is going to be conjoining both Saturn and Pluto over the course of the week in Capricorn. And then the non-lunar aspects of the week that we have remaining are Mars trining Neptune and a very liberating and exciting Jupiter trine Uranus at the end of the week. So those are all the things that we're going to be getting to and trying to cover. It's a lot of ground to cover, but we will explore with our open minds and open hearts, hopefully, and do the best that we can. Essential dignities for the week. The sun is moving through the second decan of Sagittarius at the beginning of the week, where it has triplicity rulership by day, and then moving into the third decan of Sagittarius, where it also retains triplicity rulership by day because the sun is the diurnal ruler of the fire signs, and triplicity being associated with the elements and the winds. So this is kind of like the sun has the wind in its sails by day. So it may be a time where we have a better ability to express ourselves, to issue commands in a healthy way, where we're going to get the support of our community for shining our light, for expressing our intellect and our deepest selves, and whatever makes us identify with spirit and soul as well. Um, Jupiter is, of course, has just moved into its fall in Capricorn, a place where it's not super comfortable, where it's instead of being in its home domicile of Sagittarius, where it was had all the resources it needed to expand and be visionary and create bridges and confirm, uh, growth has slowed down a little bit. Uh, Jupiter is hanging out in the temple of Saturn. And the temple of Saturn is a place where, to get things done, we need to do the things that are necessary rather than the things that we potentially desire or hope for. We may have to get down to business and do some of the dirty work, roll up our sleeves, consolidate, let go, um, work within a set of limitations. Jupiter also has dignity by face from the first 10 degrees, so it is in its own decan, which can lend some support. Um, I have a good Jupiter story, which really actually tends to will kind of coincide with that. Uh, you know, being in the terms of Mercury, I thought that was interesting. Jupiter's in the terms of Mercury from 0 to 7 degrees, but in its own face, right? I recently have been kind of purging my budget of excessive things like services that I don't need, subscriptions to, like, I don't know, like online TV and stuff that I don't ever watch, and did a real evaluation of where my resources were going, and found that I was paying way too much for my cellular service, with a company that I'd been with for a long time, a very big corporate company, and had been sticking with it because I had been grandfathered in with this unlimited data plan or something like that. And if I had changed plans with the same company, I would have lost my phone number. So I had been resisting for a long time. And recently, when Jupiter moved right into Capricorn, I was like, I've had enough of this. I need to really do the research to figure out a different solution. Actually talked to a friend who gave me some good advice about one of these smaller companies that uses the same cellular network as the bigger companies, but charges you way less, and ended up making the switch and retaining my phone number and saving myself um, quite a substantial amount of money over the course of a year. I was paying a ridiculous amount of money for basically the same service I could have gotten for substantially less. And I thought that was just a great example of Jupiter and Capricorn bringing you benefit by consolidating or letting something go, by setting a limitation, by trimming the fat, you actually bring yourself a benefit. And I thought that was it was just a beautiful expression of Jupiter moving into Capricorn. So I would encourage you to really take a look at if you have any excesses in your life over the course of this Jupiter Capricorn period, and realize that the way forward, the way to renewed growth is possibly through that letting go, that consolidation, that coming to terms with limitation, and through really getting real and sober about what your dreams are and what your needs are and how you're going to move forward in your life. By me taking a sober look at my actual outlay of resources, I was able to let go of something that wasn't serving me. And I think that that's going to be the way to gracefully navigate Jupiter in Capricorn. I think from a a perspective of trying to do that energy correctly. And there is no right or wrong way to do a planet. It just kind of is, right? But I think that going with the flow of what is required of you rather than resisting, I think can make the experience more pleasant or enjoyable. And I think that that is a kind of a very important benefit from studying astrology, is learning when to go with a certain planetary energy and not resisting the flow of the times, because time has quality. It has a vintage like a wine. And if we understand what the vintage of the time is, we are able to bring ourselves into alignment with it I think, more easily than if we just were ignorant of what was going on. So that's my little anecdote of Jupiter and Capricorn. If you have some stories, and I hope that you do, maybe I like sharing our consolidation stories. I get really excited about when people are actually letting go of things that they don't need anymore. But if you've got a story like that, share it in the comments below. And it's inspirational. I hope that that will inspire you, and your stories will inspire others as well. Okay. So Saturn, of course, is still in the second decan of Capricorn. It moves at a snail's pace. It is in the face of Mars right now and in the terms of Venus. So, we've got a Saturn that is still very powerful, that is helping us to come to terms with some of the things in our life that need to be let go of, some of the boundaries, depending on how it functions in your chart. Now, this is something that is important to realize, is that you to really understand how the planets are going to be working for you by transit and whatnot, you need to understand if you have a diurnal or a nocturnal chart. In a day chart, Saturn is probably going to function slightly better because it is of the day sect. In a night chart, Saturn may prove to be a little bit more problematic. It may be the limitations that you have to work through may feel more oppressive. Um, some of the coldness and isolation and distance that is mitigated when you have Saturn in a day chart by the heat of the day could feel very slow, oppressive, cold if you have it in a night chart. So this is something to examine in your own chart and see how Saturn is functioning for you. Overall, though, a malefic planet tends to bring somewhat better outcomes when it is in good condition, rather than acting erratically and inconsistently and potentially malevolently when it is in a debility. Okay, so that's Saturn. Venus is hanging out with Saturn this week as well, and going to be making a conjunction to it on Wednesday, as well as with Pluto. It has triplicity rulership by the daytime. Venus is the diurnal ruler of the earth signs, so it has some communal support by day. And it's also going to be in its own terms from 14 degrees to 22 degrees, and then moving into the terms of Saturn at the end of the week. So when a planet is in its own terms, it's able to kind of set its own curriculum. It is working within, kind of almost like it's self-employed. I have a Venus that is in its own terms, that is ruling my midheaven. And in general, I've been able to set the curriculum for the classes that I teach, and have a lot of experience with self-employment. So there's a kind of an autonomy that comes along when a planet is in its own terms. So we're going to see that with Venus at the beginning of the week. Mars is moving through the second decan of Scorpio. I wrote down Virgo, but I just forgot the little tail. Yeah, the second decan of Scorpio here. Um, where it has rulership by domicile and triplicity rulership at night. Mars being the triplicity ruler of the water signs at night. Remember, with elemental rulership, we have one planet ruling by day and one planet ruling by night. Um, Mars is going to be in the terms of Mercury from 11 to 19 degrees. Mercury itself is going to be changing signs or ingressing into a new sign this week. It's going to be moving out of Mars's temple of Scorpio and into Jupiter's temple of Sagittarius, which is its exile. There were certain planets that were sort of an antithesis to one another in traditional astrology, and they can be a little bit surprising when you first start studying it. And Jupiter actually is somewhat of an opposite nature, not an exact opposite, but it sort of has an antithetical nature to Mercury. Jupiter is representative of things that are big, expansive, unifying. It brings things together in a bridging quality. It is the judge, the cosmic judge. Whereas Mercury is the lawyer. Mercury is the one that wants to argue and take a different perspective. It wants to separate things into categories, wants to communicate many different ideas. And when Mercury moves into Jupiter's sign, um, it's an uncomfortable place for the lawyer. If the lawyer is, becoming the judge, it's a little bit of a confusing place for Hermes. Okay, so that is it's called its traditional exile. Um, it does have rulership by face in the first decan or the first 10 degrees, so it does have a little bit of dignity, and it will be on the terms of Jupiter from 0 to 12 degrees. We'll go in a little bit more depth on Mercury as we move through our week. The lunar report for the week is that the moon is going to start off in Taurus, which is its exaltation, where it has triplicity rulership by the night. The moon is the nocturnal ruler of the earth signs. It also has dignity by face and from 10 to 20 degrees, the second decan of Taurus. So we'll have a pretty good moon at the beginning of the week, starting out in the gibbous phase, moving into that, waxing into that full moon. We've got a moon that's increasing in light, which makes it more powerful and more able to bring things into manifestation, which are the types of things that the moon wants to do. It wants to bring things into being. So it's a fertile moon at the beginning of the week. When the moon moves into Gemini, it does lose some dignity and becomes peregrine, which means it's a wandering star or a wandering planet, where it is a stranger in a strange land, or it doesn't have any essential dignity. The moon then moves into Cancer, where that is its domicile rulership there in Cancer, where it also has dignity by face from 20 to 30 degrees. So the moon will improve its condition as it moves into Cancer, but it'll be starting to oppose Saturn, Pluto, and Venus and the South Node. So Cancer moons have been a little funky over the last year or so because of that stack up of those kind of challenging energies in Capricorn. Generally, the Cancer moon would be a time where we feel really comfortable at home or like feel very nurturing. But since we have this opposition to all those Capricorn planets, it may be a time of conflict and of limitation and of some sort of no coming into the picture, or a need to balance out two very disparate types of energies in our life, with the domestic spheres and maybe the more public spheres in our life. Okay, and then at the end of the week, the moon is going to move into Leo, where it is again peregrine without dignity. All right, so that is the essential dignity report for the week. Let's start out with Monday. Let's share the screen here so you can see what we're looking at. Boom, shared. Okay, so this is Monday, December 9th. The first aspect of the day is an opposition from the moon to Mars at 13 degrees, very early in the morning, about 4 o'clock in the morning on the East Coast. So we're going to be kind of, maybe that creates some restlessness in our sleep, where we're triggering some sort of action, potentially over the course of maybe the end of Sunday into early Monday morning. Potentially we feel some sort of conflict or need to balance the Scorpio or Taurus ruled area of our chart. And then the big thing of the day really is going to be Mercury ingressing into the sign of the of the Centaur or the Archer at 4:42 a.m. And if you remember, we have the first decan of Sagittarius associated with the Eight of Wands, which was called swiftness or speed, or the poisoned arrow in 36 faces. Excuse me. And this decan was associated with moving towards a goal, with having some kind of vision and taking actionable steps towards it through motion, through speed. And this, Mercury is also associated with swiftness and speed. And I think that this is one of the things where we have Mercury ruling this phase or this decan. So because we have a very fast planet associated with movement, communication, swiftness, and speed, moving through that goal-orientated, action-orientated thing. We may be thinking about taking an action. We may be communicating our ideas to people. I would say that the positive qualities of this placement could be an optimism that is infectious, where we are communicating our belief system, where we are, mobilizing the support and resources of our peers to move forward towards our chosen target. Now, it does have a downside, though, because this is a planet in exile. This is a planet where it is in a foreign territory. It's in a domicile that is where it's not really getting the resources that it generally prefers. And we were talking about this with Jupiter being in its fall, getting it's kind of a strange bedfellow with Saturn resources. And with this, there's kind of almost an antithesis, though, with Mercury and Jupiter. So one of the things that we can do with Mercury and Sagittarius is we can start to be very evangelical about our beliefs. This is a placement where we may believe something so strongly that we feel like we need to argue with people and bring them over to our side. We have a crusade. It's not enough for us to pursue it ourselves. Everybody needs to know about it, and everybody needs to, come over to our way of thinking. And that can create some conflict. We also may be honest to a fault. Jupiter and Sagittarius being associated with truth, and you may be trying to express your truth, and that could get you in some trouble as well. This is a foot and mouth kind of placement, where you may not have the quality of tact that Mercury normally has in other signs, where they're able to communicate something in a way that is flexible. Another quality of Mercury is its flexibility, and it loses some of that, I think, in Sagittarius, where it may become a little bit more inflexible, and it may be trying to express its own truth rather than listening to multiple perspectives and then making some sort of determination. So I think one of the things that we can do and watch out for is, first of all, maybe thinking before we speak, maybe thinking about how our opinions and our vision might affect someone else without just blurting it out. That could be one way we could, be a little bit more graceful during this transit. Listening is important too. This is a placement. I've had some clients and some friends with this placement where they love to tell me all about what they believe and what their views are, but when it comes to listening to other people's viewpoints, that's not their strong suit. So maybe slowing down and trying to take someone else's opinion into account before we get entrenched in our own position could be another way to successfully navigate this. This is another placement where we can fall prey to dogmatic thinking. And of course, maybe we are attached to a belief system, and we are attached to the form that it takes rather than getting to the essence of it. And this is something where, this is kind of one of the definitions of dogma as being, attached to some sort of orthodox way of doing something because that's the way it is and that's the way it was written. And, there's a fundamentalist kind of tendency with this placement where we say, well, this is how it was written in this very ancient book, and I'm going to, I have to follow this rule. Okay. And I think we can get carried away with that with this placement too. So just those are the things to watch out for with Mercury and Sagittarius. You may be more optimistic in your thinking, though. This may be, like I said, that could be one of the benefits where, it's moving out of a Mars ruled sign and we're expressing our um, Jupiterian optimism. And we may be expressing some of our ambition too, because Jupiter is in Capricorn in a Saturn ruled sign and it wants to build. We may be expressing our blueprint and how we want to build our lives. The issue that happens now, though, with Jupiter in Capricorn and Mercury in Sagittarius is these two planets are in a condition called aversion. It's very difficult, if not impossible, for Jupiter to provide for Mercury because of it's in a blind spot. It's kind of like Mercury's hanging out in Jupiter's castle or Jupiter's temple, but Jupiter doesn't know that it's there. Jupiter itself may be in in a poor condition, being in Saturn's temple. It's busy getting rid of things, and it might not be able to provide for that Sagittarian ruled area of your chart because it's got its own kind of its own job to do right now, and it's not necessarily a fun one. So that may be a little bit of a damper on our enthusiasm. So it's not an awesome Mercury, but it's something where if we are conscientious about the types of impulses that we may have, that's what I like to think about with astrology. There's just new impulses that may be flowing through us. There may be new. It's kind of like the weather, where we are channeling some of these energetic things, and we may be more inclined to act in a certain way. And I think that um, observational awareness in the moment, that realization is what's going to, potentially help us move more towards pronoia, having a little bit of foreknowledge to make a better decision, and moving us a little bit away from ananke, which is the decisions that we make in ignorance. All right. So that is Mercury in Sagittarius. The moon is going to be making a couple of other aspects on Monday. It's going to be sextiling Neptune from Taurus to Pisces at 15 degrees at about 9:20 in the morning. It is then going to be making a trine to Venus in Capricorn at about 11 a.m. And then it's going to be trining Saturn in the afternoon around 3 o'clock, and also making a trine to Pluto at 8:12 p.m. at 21 degrees. So we may be, experiencing this kind of like visionary quality at the beginning of our day, uh, with some positive aspects. There's generally positive aspects for this day. So this may be where we're in that very hopeful stage of Mercury moving into Sagittarius, and we're seeing some of the benefits of putting our plans into action, and that could help us to express our enthusiasm with everyone. I would say, just don't get too attached to your own vision that you fail to take into account other people's viewpoints. Tuesday, the moon is going to be moving from its exaltation in Taurus to the sign of Gemini, where it loses some dignity at 11:47 a.m. So it's a very fertile day on Monday. I would take advantage of that fertility to put some things into motion with a very positive moon there. And it's going to be a little bit more challenging as the moon starts to move into its uh, bondage. Okay, when it moves into the bond, when it is within 15 degrees opposite the sun. So here you see right here on Tuesday, towards the evening, the moon is going to be under the bond within 15 degrees of the opposition, where it is definitely in a weakened position according to the traditional authors. This is kind of like very similar to being under the beams of the sun, where it was getting burned up by all that heat, and maybe some of the significations were going underground or behind the scenes or very hidden. It is going to be um, making and applying aspect to Mercury towards the afternoon, though, I think slightly before it goes under the bond. So you can see here at about 2 degrees, it's going to be making and applying opposition to Mercury. So there may be some kind of conversation that needs to happen out in the open before that moon goes, underground, so to speak. Uh, and it may be a challenging conversation. Just be very careful around this time frame on Tuesday to uh, get your good listening ears open, and take some time before spouting off too enthusiastically. Um, this opposition is something we're going to be working through towards for the entire week. This Mercury um, Gemini kind of lunar opposition is going to be kind of giving us a little bit of uh, a taste of what that full moon is going to be about. And this is kind of the trying to balance out some of the details of our life with the visionary quality. And there may be some confusion with that, because a lot of times when we have a plan that we want to enact and we want to take some action, but we've really got to make sure that we're paying attention to all of the little things that need to happen for it to become a reality. And there may be some tension with that over the course of this week, and we'll dive into that with the tarot a little bit when we get to Thursday. Before I get more into that, though, on Wednesday, the 11th, the moon is still going to be in Gemini, and it's waxing gibbous phase. The gibbous phase was associated with analyzing and perfecting before the big reveal. So we may be really kind of trying to figure out what works and what doesn't in the enactment of our plan. And there may be kind of taking stock before we really move forward and see the fruits of our labors. The big aspect of Wednesday is Venus making a conjunction with Saturn at 5:04 a.m. So we're going to feel this moving late Tuesday into very early Wednesday. And this aspect, you can see here, Venus at 18 degrees is going to be conjoining Saturn at 19 degrees, perfecting very early on Wednesday. And this may require a very sober conversation with you in your relationships, with any Venus ruled part of your chart. Up on my screen here, I have a Gemini ascendant. So Venus would be ruling the fifth house of children, of how you take pleasure, of entertainment, of your creative self-expression, and the 12th house of secret enemies, of like self-undoing and things like that. So if I were to be giving advice to a Gemini person at this point, this Saturn Venus conjunction is happening in the 8th house of shared resources. So there may be some kind of issue where perhaps you're overdoing it with pleasure spending, or with pursuing pleasure through, I don't know if it could be through partying or something like that, and maybe you're spending too much and your partner's like, hey, you're going to the bar too often and coming home a little too tipsy, you need to sober up a little bit. That could be one kind of manifestation of this. Or we've got to tighten the purse strings and you can't go on that uh, that vacation you want, or something like that. Anytime we have a combination with Saturn, there's going to be a no involved. So try not to get too bent out of shape if there's a constructive no that needs to happen. This is an opportunity for you to really get in touch with accepting that we are in this body and we have limitations and things like that. This could also be a time when you're committing to something, like perhaps Venus is running right into the planet of time and endurance, and saying, you know what, it's actually just time that we commit to this and that we really just make this real. So this could be a conversation where you finally put the label on the relationship, or you say, yeah, we actually are in a relationship. Here's our title. We're committing to this for the long term in a very practical way. The conjunction is going to be happening in the second decan of Capricorn, where we see the Three of Pentacles, where people are making a plan, where they are discussing how they're going to build into the future, where they're making long-range plans. Austin Cobbett calls it the pyramid. So we're building a structure that is going to last. So this may be a moment where you're creating something, related to the Libra or Taurus ruled area of your chart, and it's going to be birthing through the birth channel of Capricorn. Okay, so those two things are players in the narrative, but it's birthing through that Capricorn channel, and it may be something that you're trying to build or let go of potentially. They're two similar sides of the same coin, but we're thinking about endurance, and it's a really good time to maybe figure out your values and what your enduring values are as well, because Venus is associated with what we desire, what we value, And we may have to make some shifts with that and figure out what stays and what goes with our values as well. So that's going to be Wednesday. Um, the last aspect of that day is the moon making a square to Neptune in the evening at about 5:12 p.m. with Gemini to Pisces. So there may be a lot of there could be some anxiety that's starting to happen within the thought processes. The second decan of Gemini is associated with the nine of swords, which is the nightmare card, basically, where you have so many options that you're up awake at night with anxiety. Um, I have a theory that I may be, you know, putting into some sort of lecture at some point where uh, an exploration, really, I don't know, with the signs of the zodiac and the tarot being associated with the actual house placements in the Thema Mundi. And in the Thema Mundi, which has Cancer rising, that would place Gemini in the 12th house of self undoing and of limitation, the joy of Saturn. And we see in those tarot cards, the 8, 9, and 10 of swords, figures that are, bound, that are having mental anguish and are lying prostrate on the ground in defeat. And all of those things, I think, reflect some themes with the 12th house too. So this may be something where your mind is just running circles and you have to kind of try to get a grip on it and say, you know what, this may just be uh, a an anxiety from having too many options. And one of the things that I can do, or you can do, is make a choice. A lot of the times we just keep going back and forth on things, and that's what's really creating the anxiety. And sometimes when we commit to a choice, whether it ends up being the right one or the wrong one, that can actually we sometimes we get to the same place whether we make the right decision or the wrong decision. Maybe it may just take us a little longer if we make the wrong one, um, but eventually if we realize our error, we'll come back around to the decision that was the correct one all along. So I would encourage you to, instead of endlessly deliberating, uh, just make a choice. See what you can do to move forward in your life. I've been working through this myself, as I have a number of 12th house placements, including my sun and Mercury, and I get very indecisive about things. I was sharing this in the class that I take with a number of astrologers when we were studying charts, and a chart that was very similar to my own came up, and a client was another student was asking how to help this client, and I offered up kind of my own personal journey of trying to monitor my own mental health and things like that. I think with the 12th house, we can see it was called the house of the bad daimon, or the bad spirit. And this is where we get pulled off of our course, potentially by our own thought processes. And definitely can attest to that being true in my own experience. And I think that the thing that you have to do is recognize that thoughts are just thoughts and they're not necessarily reflective of your reality. And I had another student of mine actually who made the observation that maybe potentially the remedy for 12th house maladies is to potentially take an action and just to get out of your own head and do something physical. Whereas if you have some sort of accident or illness in the 6th house, perhaps the remedy for that is to slow down and go internal and take less external action and rest. So I thought that was really interesting, and it's been serving me fairly well lately. Sometimes we just have to take an action and live with the consequences, and that's way better than just living in this state of limbo. And I think that's really important this week, is we may just feel like in this limbo, and that may be really what's causing our suffering, rather than the mistake itself, or just any action. It may end up not being a mistake, it may end up being a good move, but you'd never be able to embrace it or manifest it if you didn't just take the leap. So something to consider as we move into this kind of Gemini full moon. All right, I'm gonna move over to Thursday here. So let's talk more about the full moon in depth here. The full moon is going to be happening at 12:12 a.m., so very early in the morning on Thursday of 12:12. There's lots of 12s going on with this. 12:12 a.m. on December 12th, 12:12. Maybe there's some kind of theme with that. Uh, just off the top of my head, the number 12 was associated with the Hanged Man in the tarot, which was about reversing a perspective. So potentially maybe there is something in your life where you may be experiencing a need to shift a perspective and have a flexibility, and to be careful also, though, not to martyr yourself. You could see that the figure was hanging upside down on a cross, and potentially seeing the world from an alternate perspective. So, it speaks to potentially the need to alter uh, a thought processy that that you may normally fit into to move forward in your life. Um, Interesting. Yeah, that was just something that thinking about the 12s. Also, the moon is going to be moving, as I was saying, through the second decan of Gemini, which is represented by the Nine of Swords, and opposing the Sun in the second decan, which is represented by the Nine of Wands. Now, in the tarot, the minor arcana of the tarot, we definitely see some opposite type of themes when we see cards that represent elemental opposites in astrology. So we have swords and wands being opposite one another, representing air and fire signs respectively. And here we have a card that's associated with a nightmare, with despair, being in opposition with a figure that is holding his ground, who has potentially had an injury, but he's saying, okay, I've still got the energy to continue to fight. That card was called Great Strength, or Strength, in the Book of Thoth or Book T. And we see here, doing some research in Austin Coppock's book, we have it's associated with the centaur and the unification of disparate elements in order to achieve a goal. That's a quote from Austin's book that is going to be reissued in the coming months, hopefully in the early part of 2020. If I'm correct on that, I think it was delayed a little bit, but I feel like he's finishing that up. An awesome book. I really recommend it. I'm not going to have a I don't know, what is the word I'm looking for? Uh, I'm not going to be one of the only ones that has the book. So once it comes out, you can buy it and then be able to read and get benefit from all of that wisdom as well. So this is really about the alignment of the body with our intentions, and really taking that idea and putting it into manifest form, and having the tenacity and courage and the will to move towards that desire. And I think that what the themes of this full moon are going to be is just really trying to overcome some of the doubt or the self-doubt or the feeling of overwhelm with actually moving towards that chosen goal. And this is something that we may be coming up, early Thursday, late Wednesday, as we move towards that full moon. Um, Along with this, we're going to see Mercury opposite the moon here, right? So we've got the full moon is opposite its host. So that's an interesting condition. It is making contact with its host, which is generally an open line of communication, which is better than if there wasn't an open line. But we may be able to come to uh, achieve our goals, but it's not going to be without some kind of conflict, though, because of the opposition there to the host. Oppositions are of the nature of Saturn, so there may be something where we have to work within a limit. Maybe the goal that we manifest is not as expansive as we would have hoped. Maybe we have to work within a compromise potentially to our vision to take maybe the first step towards the goal. Yeah, don't get attached to getting every part of every piece of the pie. Like, take the first step and then let it unfold naturally. I think if you're able to take the first step without insisting on winning the whole war, if you win a battle, you don't have to win the whole war. that will give you the strength to continue to fight and maybe the inspiration to continue moving towards the goal rather than having to achieve it all at once. All right. This is a culmination of the new moon that we experienced at 4 degrees of Sagittarius on November the 26th. So if you're doing a little bit of reflecting, like the full moon does, go back to the November 26th and see what kind of things you were initiating around that time, or what kind of things were cropping up in your life, what kind of divine assignments you were being given, and you may see some themes of that coming to fruition. Um, let's see. The second decan of Gemini was also associated with uh, opposites and balancing opposites and having a multiplicity of options. So, as I said before, sometimes it's easier just to make a choice rather than to stay in that limbo of having too many things going on. Other aspects of the day at 10:33 p.m. after the moon moves into Cancer. Moon's going to move into Cancer about 6:23 p.m. and then make an opposition in the evening to Jupiter in Capricorn. So this is the first time that the moon is going to be making an opposition to Jupiter, newly ingressed into Capricorn. So we may see some new themes associated with in the Cancer Capricorn area of your chart, potentially with some benefits. Uh, Generally, when we've been experiencing Cancer moons, it's just been these tough conversations with the malefic Saturn there, and Pluto, another difficult planet where we're having to let go of things. This may give us a little bit of relief, I think, with feeling like we are having at least one planet in there. In addition to Venus this week too. I forgot about that. Basically, we have both benefics hanging out there, trying to help. So we may have it's going to be a mixed bag. I don't think that these things cancel each other out. From what I understand, you will have good things that happen, and you'll have limitations that happen. So there's and I've experienced this with having a mix of benefics and malefics in my own second house of resources. There are times when some very good things happen, and some times when some very bad things happen, and it's not like they're canceling each other out. It's just kind of like you take the good with the bad kind of thing. And that may be what we're experiencing with this Cancer moon, where we may be having some nice contacts that are happening even through the opposition. Some authors disagree as to whether the hard aspects with benefics are positive, but there are quite a few that still think that we can glean some benefit from that. But it may come through some effort. I think that's the thing. Like, benefics still may bring good things into our life, but there may be through some extra effort that we need to make at the end of Thursday. The moon is also going to be making a sextile to retrograde Uranus in Taurus, so igniting that desire to change, and potentially kind of shining some light on the ongoing Jupiter-Uranus trine that is perfecting towards the end of the week. This is a week where we're really starting to put things into form, where a lot of our ideas are starting to coalesce and manifest into the very practical earthy world of form. Since we have the trine from Jupiter in an earth sign, Capricorn, the cardinal earth sign of Capricorn, where we initiate material things, and then coming in contact with the fertile ground of Taurus, which Uranus is hanging out in and has been for quite some time, and will be for another few years. Really helping us break out of some of the limitations in that area of our life, and some of the old material structures that we may be hanging on to. Okay, so Friday the 13th, moon will be in Cancer still, in the full moon phase, where we're kind of seeing the fruition of our goals coming to light, of whatever the karmic seed that was planted at the beginning of the new moon starting to manifest. And we have a couple of non-lunar aspects this week, or this day, that are pretty important. The first one is Mars. Let me look at the chart here. I haven't really been showing you what's going on here on the chart. So there you see the full moon happening as the sun and the moon come into opposition. on late Wednesday, early Thursday, okay, at 19 degrees, if you want to get a better idea of what this looks like. And then on Thursday, we're seeing the opposition. Okay, there you go, of the moon and Jupiter. All right. And then the trine here of, I'm sorry, the sextile of the moon and Uranus. All right. And then we'll move forward into Friday. And at 6:56 a.m., we are seeing a trine of Mars in the second decan of Scorpio at about 15 degrees, making an exact trine to Neptune in Pisces. Okay, so let's unpack this one. This is part also of a grand water trine with the moon. So we're seeing three areas of our life working intuitively together with one another, flowing in a very emotional kind of cooperation with one another, and potentially bringing some interesting things to light in a very kind of harmonious relationship with one another. Now, Mars trine Neptune. This I've been drawing upon a really cool book that I like that was recommended to me by my astrology teacher. This is called The Archetypal Universe by Ren Butler. And he speaks about having spiritual vitality, feelings, which could be also manifest as spiritual ambition. There is the quality of potentially the negative side of this is a feeling of pointlessness or futility. Sometimes Neptune can kind of, sap our motivation or drain our strength or dissolve our motivation. So we have a dissolving quality with Neptune coming in contact with the willpower. The positive side of this, though, is that our will could start to be connected with some kind of higher purpose. And we may be trying to take actions that are in service of our higher self. So that could be something that could be very interesting too. We may be taking an action, though, that is also very idealized at this time. We may be on a crusade of some sort. I think that the best way to use this energy is the concept of effortless mastery. There's this book that I like that was written by a jazz piano player called Effortless Mastery, and it was about being in the flow state and being in the moment. It was about practicing to the point where whatever you were practicing became your instincts, and then in the performance aspect of it, letting go and letting the instincts take over. So this could be a time where you are experiencing a flow state, where you potentially are engaging in enlightened non-action, where you release your striving and just allow things to happen. If you were comparing it to some sort of martial art, this could be like a Keto, where you're, moving gently out of the way and using the energy that is presented to you, or Tai Chi, where you're moving with the flow of events. It's also it was described in Ren Butler's book as being closely associated with the concept of Wu Wei, which was a Taoist. That was how the Taoists considered the flow of the universe and kind of the natural way of things, where we were just going with nature and not trying to resist it. So this is something that's going to be happening on Friday the 13th as part of that grand water trine with the moon. And the moon being a part of this it's very fast moving, but it's going to be activating this even more intensely. The moon's an activator. The moon brings things into being. So maybe look for those two planetary placements in Scorpio and Pisces respectively, to be channeling that energy into the Cancer ruled area of your chart via the moon. Okay, like bringing it into form in that Cancer area ruled of your chart. So that's something that you can look for in your own chart. In the later morning, Venus is going to be making a conjunction, as you can see right here, with Pluto in Capricorn. So this is also part of the theme of the day. And Venus is going through some stuff this week. This is like a little bit of a I don't know. I guess you could call it a come to Jesus moment, right? Where you're kind of, getting a reality check within relationships. You're coming to terms with what is going on, the reality of it. You're getting sober within the relationship. You're learning about the limitations of it. You may be coming face to face with some of the uglier parts of it that you don't like. And perhaps the tough conversations that you had in the beginning of the week when Venus was conjoining Saturn may be a catalyst for a regenerative quality that we may have when Pluto conjoins with Venus. This could trigger some very intense feelings that are bubbling up from the underworld. Pluto associated with the underworld, with like the nuclear power of things. I like to think of it as the volcano and the volcanic lava that is brewing underneath the surface. We could think about this as the power of love or the love of power. We could go both ways with it. So we could get a ruthless ambition associated with Venus too, and Pluto together. Remember, Saturn's still co-present with this arrangement, so there's definitely a slowing down quality that is still happening, even as Venus is separating from Saturn. We may be having some sort of obsession in the Capricorn ruled area of our chart. There may be a jealousy or a possessiveness associated in that, functional house as well. Some of the underworld themes that were discussed with Ren Butler. I love this book. He gives you all these wonderful meditations about how the aspect is going to, or the combination, the planetary combination is going to manifest. And then he gives you these very practical mythological stories and like, images for integration. And he talks about underworld themes like Persephone, where Persephone was the maiden that spent was basically tricked into spending half the year with Pluto or Hades in the underworld, and has to go back and forth. And there was themes of manipulation and of power and control struggles. So that may be kind of something to meditate on, is the myth of Persephone. Leda and the Swan is another one, where Zeus came down and transformed himself into a swan and basically forcefully mated with Leda, raped Leda, and from that mating, that forcible mating, was hatched the egg that eventually was born Helen of Troy out of, birthed Helen of Troy. So out of something very intense and violent came something very beautiful. Of course, Helen of Troy was the woman that was so beautiful that men went to war over her, and she married this king. I have a song about it, so I did a little bit of research back in the day, where she was married to the king, but then caught the fancy of this prince from another country, and like ran away with him, and the king went to war and vowed to kill her for her indiscretion, for her cheating ways. But then when he finally found her, he couldn't do it because she was just too beautiful. I thought that was an interesting story. Also, the story of Medusa, where we have something very powerful but very dangerous. Medusa, of course, is a very beautiful maiden that lured away, I believe, the husband of a powerful goddess, and then was punished and sent into basically the underworld for her transgressions. So some of those themes could come up as well. So something to keep an eye on. But how would we use this effectively? How would we observe this effectively? Be willing to be changed by what comes up. Be willing to uh, uh, be realistic about what is going on in your relationships, and be willing to make a shift. When we stubbornly get attached to one way of doing things, that's when we really get into the conflicting situation. So we have to be willing to go into the depths, bring out whatever treasure we can, release any corruption that we find there, and then move forward into maybe, hopefully, a rebirth. All right. So the moon is also going to be making a trine to Neptune that day, as I talked about with the grand water trine. So that's going to be, I wonder also if this kind of thing, where there is a concept in the medieval astrology called the transfer of light. And, the moon is going to be making a trine first to Neptune and then a trine to uh, Mars. So I wonder if this, and I don't know this for sure, but maybe there is a gathering of, you know, Neptunian idealism, and then we're putting it into action as the moon carries that light over to Mars. Now, the only flaw I could see in this theory is that I don't know if Neptune actually has any light. It's not a visible planet. So that was one of the problems with, well, it's not a problem. It's just one of the realities of outer planets versus, traditional visible planets. So I don't know if that concept necessarily works when you have a planet that isn't actually visible, but worth thinking about taking that idealized notion of things and then putting it into action with Mars there. Okay, let's get to our weekend. There's a lot of things to cover this week. On Saturday, the 14th, the moon is going to be in Cancer, but moving into Leo at the very end of the day around 11 p.m. Still working through that full moon phase if we're using the eightfold moon phase, where we are getting kind of a, things are coming to light, coming into being, coming into form, manifesting. Saturday looks like a tougher day. We've got all the idealism of that grand water trine on Friday that is going to be meeting with cold, hard reality on Saturday, where Saturn is, or the moon is going to be separating from all those beautiful benefics, Venus and well, actually, if I do it in order, the moon is going to be making an opposition first to Saturn at 4:32 a.m., an opposition to Pluto at 8:47 a.m., and then the opposition to Venus at about 11 a.m. So we may be going through this kind of, feeling of limitation within our relationships, family and domestic considerations, public versus career type of actions, flow versus structure, an erratic path versus climbing the mountain step by step. That may be something where we're trying to uh, figure out whether we need to commit to the goal that we have decided on in a very straightforward manner, or if we need to make adjustments. If we need to, because remember, Cancer moves in a slightly erratic path, 2 steps forward, 1 step back type of thing, or side to side, instead of Capricorn, which is slowly climbing its way up the mountain. So yeah, the morning, some tough conversations that may need to happen within the relationship. All right. On Sunday, the mood may lighten a little bit. After the difficult morning of Saturday, we're going to have a moon that is in Leo, beginning the disseminating phase, where we're going to be able to, whoops, sorry, knocked over my water bottle, where we may be able to start to glean some of the lessons of the full moon and start to distribute some of the ideas that came to light and put them into action and into motion. And it's kind of like we were able to eat the fruit as it has ripened, and maybe share it with others. Hence the disseminating and the giving forth. This is when the moon starts to distribute its light. It starts to wane. So we've been building, 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 and then at the full moon, we do this shift to waning, which is the moon is giving light off, okay? All right, so now with the sun, on Sunday, the 15th, moon in Leo, the moon is going to be making a square very early in the morning to Uranus and Taurus at 2 degrees. So this is kind of the initiation in our day, and that is also going to be seeing, I'm going to bring it up on the chart here. So there is all of our opposition aspects on Saturday. And then we have, I'm going to move this back so we see it. At about 2 degrees, there we go. We see a square with Uranus and Taurus, and then we see the trine of Jupiter to Uranus. So we've got 3 players in this aspect here, and this is an aspect that has been building for a few weeks. Let's talk a little bit about Jupiter trine Uranus. And then we'll bring in the temporary aspect of the moon square Uranus. It's not as big of a deal. It may be something where we have to consider it as part of the ongoing story, but it's just part of a bigger narrative. And the bigger narrative of Jupiter trine Uranus, which perfects at 2 p.m. on Sunday, is dramatic breakthroughs, quantum leaps, sudden and unexpected openings, promotion, Promethean themes, gifts from the gods. It also begin associate with hubris. We may get a little bit too high on our horse and have a humbling that comes through. But for the most part, this could be like a lucky break that happens, some kind of earthly innovation. This is an aspect that is uh, magnifying all of the Uranian themes we've been experiencing in Taurus for quite some time. So it's just making those things bigger. It may be a very pivotal moment in that Uranian story that we've been living for the last year and some change. This may be the moment of yes. Uh, Jupiter is the cosmic yes, right? But the flip side of that is that Jupiter is in Saturn's um, domicile, and it may be a yes that comes through a no. Like, I know that we're double speaking there, but remember when I talked about the phone bill? I got a yes because I said no to the excessive company that was felt very oppressive, and I let it go, and I said, okay, I'm going to say maybe yes to something uh, less. And maybe it doesn't have exactly all the features of the other thing, but do I really need those other things? Probably not. So maybe you're experience a big breakthrough through figuring out what really needs to stay and what really needs to go, and working very hard for it. This could be some kind of eureka moment. You may have a moment of genius or brilliance. uh, Something to consider with this, though, is we still have Jupiter hanging out with Saturn, Pluto, Venus in the south node, though. So even though this is a very expansive and innovative type of uh, placement and trine, there is definitely a quality of closure, coming to terms with something, maybe with potentially letting something go, but that letting go creating the liberation. Um, I think that's the big thing is how can we let go of what isn't serving us anymore? You would be surprised. Actually, maybe you aren't surprised. Maybe you really feel this. I know for me personally, when I finally let go of something that's been weighing on my shoulders, I just feel so light. I feel so enthusiastic. It's like my will to live comes back. And this is a fairly uh, normal occurrence for me because I get very indecisive about things, and when you get indecisive, you tend to procrastinate, and when you procrastinate, you just feel the weight of all the things that you haven't done, and that's just very painful, and it's a lot of suffering. When I finally do them and get out of that indecision cycle, it's just such a burden lifted. And I have a feeling that this could be that kind of feeling too, or we just feel a burden that we've been dealing with just lifted, and we feel lighter because we got rid of something that was weighing us down. I think that's really the genius quality with this Jupiter Uranus trine. It may also be just very supportive of your new way of doing something. This is a time to really embrace the new, and to you've let go of that old pattern. You finally hopefully completed that, and now it's time to have a new expression based on your current reality, rather than a past reality you may have been holding on to that was no longer a true expression of who and what you are. And that is a pretty, uh, that's going to be a very powerful moment, I think, this week. Now, if we just bring in some of the other little things that are happening with the moon making a square at roughly the same time, there may be some challenges coming up with um, your sense of pride, your sense of identity. Maybe there is something that is, uh, you're trying to put on a new persona, or you're trying to be something new, and that it comes into conflict with someone or something. You're trying to weigh a new way of being, and maybe that triggers a strange response in someone. Um, a lot of the times when we are making changes, that can make other people feel either threatened or insecure, um, the new is scary. A lot of the times human beings don't really react really well to new things in their life. Like, and sometimes they put people in categories and they see them in a certain way. And when they make a big change or a big shift, that can be a little intimidating. I know in my own experience, my astrology teacher, the astrologer formerly known as Adam Ellenboss, recently got initiated into the Bhakti yoga tradition as a monk and changed his name. And I'm sure that may be something that like he experiences if with his new name and people making an adjustment to his new identity and things like that. And it may feel like a very liberating experience for him, but maybe he comes into contact. I don't know. I'm just making conjecture here. Uh, so if he's watching this, if you're watching this, buddy, like maybe a family member is like, I don't get it, or something like that. And that's a very real, an example of how that could be a possibility or something like that. Um, but it's a passing thing. I think that's the thing uh, that I think with this moon square is the moon is a very transitory type of thing. And maybe that is just one conflict that is happening that will eventually people will get used to it. They'll get used to the new norm. They'll get used to the new names. They'll get used to the new identities that all of us are trying to put on and bring into being. And, you know, at the end of the day, uh, it's your life and it's your identity and it's um, your journey, and you've got to be the one that looks yourself in the mirror and is comfortable with it. And it's not really about what other people think, because really what other people think is about them. This is one of those four agreement moments where remember, don't make assumptions. uh, it's not about you. Like what people sometimes when people are reacting, it's really about their own belief systems and their own preconceived notions about things. And that can be another liberating factor, is where you realize that somebody's opinion is based on their own experiences and their own beliefs, and you may be triggering that, but it may not be a reflection of who you are and what you do. It may be just that expression is bringing up something in them to be dealt with. And that may be something we're experiencing with this Jupiter Uranus trine, with the moon kind of making a transitory square from Leo. Okay, so the last aspect of the week is the moon making a trine to Mercury at 3:18 p.m. at 9 degrees of Leo and Sagittarius. So, after we go through this aha moment and then we deal with the fallout, of you know, our new way of being, uh, we may have a fruitful conversation in the afternoon and have a new sense of hope and moving towards a long cherished goal, and our new sense of movement in our life. Remember we talked about Mercury being a new in the first decan of Sagittarius, moving towards the goal. Now, I would just caution you that instead of being like, instead of after that conversation where you're like, well, I did it and I don't care what anybody else thinks, and then being like, um, this is my new truth and now you have to believe what I believe. uh, I think it's better just to have more of an internal satisfaction, where you don't necessarily have to evangelicize um, your new way of being, because that could be a danger. Remember when I talked about that with Mercury and Sagittarius, is where it's okay to just have the peace of mind that you are doing the new thing and not have to make everyone else be like you. So that's something that just to think about towards the end of the week. Okay, I think that's what we've got. Looking ahead to next week, we have a last quarter moon on the 18th. Um, Mars is going to be making a sextile to Saturn. Mercury will be squaring Neptune. A couple planetary ingresses next week. We have Venus moving into Saturn's other domicile of Aquarius on the 20th. And then the winter solstice, as the sun moves into the sign of Capricorn, the cardinal earth sign of Capricorn, where we experience the return of the light, where the days start to get longer again, where they're not going to be longer than the night, but the light is going to start increasing. And then at the end of the week, we'll have a Venus square to Uranus and a Mars sextiling Pluto. All right. So that's what I've got for the week. Thank you for hanging out with me here, and I will see you the next time. Take care.